Hi, I'm Carter Wilson, USA Today best-selling author of 6 novels, with my next one coming out next year. 3-time Colorado Book Award winner, and I actually had the distinction of being an ITW Thriller Award finalist for Best Paperback last year, which, god damn it, I lost. You know, I've been writing for about 18 years now, and I wanted to use this video to give you a couple tips on what I've really found to be the most useful in practice in terms of writing. Some of the things that really have helped propel my thrillers, or at least so I think. But first I'm going to tell you why I'm an accidental writer and how I had to learn this industry from scratch, because I didn't actually start writing anything until I was 33 years old. You know, when I went to college, I went to essentially a business school, and you know, I got into the field of consulting for the hotel industry. So my degree was in hospitality, and didn't take a single creative writing class in college. I don't even know if I took an English class in college. You know, I always liked to read, but I just kind of fell off with reading throughout my 20s. And when I was 33, I was taking this class, this really boring class that I had to take for this business license that I used to have. And we're sitting in this just really crappy, like Ramada Inn ballroom for 8 hours, learning about who knows what. And I was bored to tears. And I had to figure out some way to kill the last 2 hours of this class. So I took out a piece of paper and I decided to give myself a puzzle. And I'd use the last 2 hours to figure out this puzzle. So for whatever reason, the following question popped into my head. The question was, if 3 people are murdered at the exact same time, in the exact same fashion, in different parts of the world, what's the connection? Again, I don't know why that question came to me, but that's the question. So I started to think about, okay, what's the answer? What's the thread that solves this question? And those 2 hours went by and I couldn't figure it out. So I went home, and it really stuck with me. So I kept thinking about it. I started to kind of write sentences about it. And those sentences turned into paragraphs, and those paragraphs turned into chapters. And in 90 days, I had a 400-page manuscript. Never having written really anything creatively in my life. And it was a terrible book. I mean, I can't stress enough how bad it was. I haven't looked at that book in a long time. But I finished it. And that was kind of the first lesson that I learned. And then I had to figure out, well, what do I do now? What do I do with a 400-page manuscript when I don't know what the hell I'm doing? I don't know anything about the publishing industry. So I just started to research from scratch, you know, using all kind of my business acumen that I'd learned up to that point to understand, okay, what is this industry all about and what do I do now? And so the first thing I learned is you have to get an agent. How do you get an agent? So I had to figure all that out. And I was actually lucky with that first pretty crappy book to get an agent after about 75 rejections. Same agent I still have today, Pam Ahern with the Ahern Agency. And then I learned it was her job to send my manuscript out to publishers and for them to reject it. So I thought that was a pretty interesting deal. And I learned that it takes about a year for your manuscript to be fully rejected by all the publishing houses. And so I started panicking and thinking that if it got rejected, then why would my agent hold on to me? So out of desperation, I wrote a second novel. So by the time the first one was totally rejected, my second one was ready to be rejected. And then that one took about a year to be fully turned down by everybody as well. So I wrote a third one, kind of getting into a rhythm. And from there, you know, that one got rejected as well. And what I started learning about from all these years of rejections is that if you actually read these rejection letters from these editors who are actually, you know, looking at your entire book, there's some great nuggets of information in there. So you should take rejection as help. You should always listen to criticism, because a lot of times the people who are criticizing your work are right. And so I listened to a lot of that feedback, and I wrote my 4th novel, and my 4th novel was the first one to be published. So finally, I think about 9 years after I started writing that day in that really boring appraisal class, my first book was on the bookshelves. And from then, it's been an up and down road. It's been, that first publisher went out of business because it was small. The second publisher did okay for me, but they said my sales weren't strong enough, so they wouldn't take my third book. And then I've been with two other publishers since then. I'm right now with Source Books, who's fantastic. They published last year's Mr. Tinder's Girl and Dead Girl in 2A and the upcoming The Dead Husband. And so when I reflect on all the rejection and all the glory, if you can even call it that I've had over the years, there are a few things that I've really learned from a writing standpoint, because you have to remember, I had to learn how to write. I didn't know anything about structure, plotting, pacing, character development. And I read books on it, but then I started to realize, I have my own voice, and I basically wrote by trial and error and decided what I felt worked and what I didn't work. And so I've compiled the following few tips for you thriller writers out there who are looking to develop your work. These are things that I've learned over the years. Hope you enjoyed them. So here are a few things that I've learned about the industry in general. So first of all, I learned that you've got to be persistent and you got to love writing, because otherwise it's going to be miserable. So don't look at it in terms of baby steps. Look at it in terms of the long-term haul. You got to set goals. Everything I do pretty much in my life is goal setting. So I'm always looking towards what's the next thing that I can do? What's the next accomplishment? Rather than trying to be mired down by the everyday slog. I always like to be looking at what that goal and achieving it. Rejection, as I mentioned, is totally important. You have to listen to it. Embrace your critics. That doesn't mean you have to do what they say, but don't tune out your readers and your critics. Likewise, you listen to advice and acceptance. If people are telling you you're doing something right, that's also something that you need to pay attention to. And you should seek feedback. You should join critique groups. You should elicit other people's opinions about your work, because you're putting your work out to the world and you want to make it as strong as possible. You shouldn't chase trends. That's about the last thing that you want to do. You should enjoy the writing. You should write what you want to write. But you should also be aware of trends. You shouldn't be ignorant about it. It is an industry. People are buying particular books during particular phases. But you don't want to chase them, because by the time your book finally comes out, that trend could be gone. It's important to build a brand. Once you start to publish a book or two, make sure people who are aware who you are. Do public speaking. Make sure you have a strong, powerful web presence and social media presence. And you should say yes when people ask you to do things. As much as possible, I try to say yes when people ask me to either speak somewhere or to contribute a piece to a blog or to be interviewed. I usually try to say yes, because it's important to keep yourself out there and in people's minds. And you should dream of success, but I like to say you got to define what success is. If you start out in this industry thinking you're going to be a multimillionaire writing books, that's probably not a good goal to have. But once you sell a book, that could be a definition of success, even if it doesn't do that well. So really define what success looks like to you. So in terms of actual pacing, pacing is the heart of all thrillers. I really believe that. Some of the things that I do that have worked well for me is I really focus on having short chapters. I'll be writing, and when all of a sudden I feel like the chapter is ended, or it feels like even if I'm like halfway through what actually happens in that chapter, I'll just end it because I want readers to feel compelled to go to the next page. I try to focus on prose being short and pithy, but making it as powerful as possible. How can I take 8 words and make them into 2 words and make that sentence that much more impactful? And I really try to engage with cliffhanger chapter endings. I think that's important. That doesn't mean the world is about to blow up at the end of each chapter. Most of my books are psychological thrillers, so it's usually about one person's individual journey. So sometimes the chapter endings are just an intense feeling of dread, or maybe just walking through a door and you don't know what's on the other side of the door. They don't have to be dramatic, but they should have a feeling of a cliffhanger to them. So here's some natural enemies of pacing that I've identified over the years. Dialogue tags, he mumbled dejectedly. do not use dialogue tags. He said, she said, or none at all. I prefer to use none if I can get away with it. Sometimes the reader will lose focus on who's saying what. So I'll just stick with he said or she said, because otherwise dialogue tags are highly distracting to the reader. An excessive surfeit of much and way too many words. Every word is expendable. You should look at every sentence as a challenge on how you can crop out words to make it as lean and efficient as possible, so that when you do actually have more of a lengthy description, it's more meaningful. And speaking of describing things, I once had a guy come up to me at a Barnes & Noble when I was doing a sign-in, and he asked me if I was one of those writers who like to describe every goddamn thing. And I said no, and I was honest, and I was happy to tell him that, because I don't spend a lot of time describing everything. Give credit to your reader. You can describe things with very few words and create a very powerful and evocative image. But if you go into a paragraph, a full paragraph in a thriller describing what the trees look like, you're going to start losing your pace, and your readers are going to get a little bit antsy. And showing off your research. I don't do a lot of research because I write psychological thrillers. I'm not writing international espionage. So certainly there are some thrillers where a lot of research is necessary. But when you're just showing it off, it's very obvious, I think, in people's books when they've clearly learned a lot about the inner workings of a 747. So they're going to tell you everything about it, even though it doesn't necessarily add to the story. So it's great to research, but I would suggest using it very sparsely in your books. Killing your darlings. So I actually have a tattoo on my arms that says "Kill your darlings," which kind of freaked out my kids when I first got that. But again, it's going back to everything that happens in the editing. You have to really go through, and you might have written something beautiful and gorgeous, and it's so maybe the perfect sentence, but if it's not supporting and adding and driving your story, then you have to get rid of it. So don't be afraid to kill your darlings. You should go through when you edit, and you should be looking at cutting out thousands and thousands of words and really trying to make your manuscript lean and well-paced, and it's going to make it that much more impactful and powerful. Again, your mantra, every word is expendable. I really do believe that. Couple examples. She wanted the same thing that her sister wanted. Why not just say she wanted the same thing as her sister? It could just be one word that you're getting rid of, and it makes a difference. This was the first sentence I had in one of my books before I changed it, and it said, "The children all crept through the house, huddled together in a mass, their soft collective footfalls producing the tiniest of creaks and groans from the floorboards." Now I kind of like that. It kind of is a nice creepy sentence, but then I realized it's not as good as just saying together they crept, the children. To me, that's a lot creepier. Or he looked in the mirror, seeing the fatigue-induced red in his eyes, but other than that, he still looked good. Close-cropped hair, not quite yet gray, same weight as in college. He was still known to turn a few heads, and Nick took pride in that. Get rid of all that. Just right, Nick was tired as hell. A drink might help. Much better, much better. So finally, the other tidbits I've learned. It's better to be memorable than to be liked. I do believe that. I might get a review that says, this is a sick book, and I'm not sure if it's a good sick or bad sick. Either way, the story is quite disturbing and I can't get it out of my head. I read that and I see it as, hey, I got in your head. You remember that. Empathize with feedback. Again, when you're getting criticism, understand their point of view, understand the reader's perspective. If they like something or if they didn't like something, don't just accept or reject it outright. Try to really get in their head to understand why they might see it from that perspective, and that will help inform your writing. You should do readings. Readings are great. Public speaking is great, and you should practice for them. So keep them short. I suggest never doing public readings more than 5 or 7 minutes, because I think no matter how good you are, people will get bored. So try to keep them short. And do more than what readers expect. So if you've written a book, maybe you create a website in support of that book that you don't really necessarily tell people about it. If they find it, it's like an Easter egg. So I try to do that with each of my books. I try to have some unique little discovery that a reader might just happen to find, and when they do, it's a whole new world to them. Newsletters, absolutely. I'm very dedicated to my monthly newsletter. I put hours and hours and hours into each one. I try to make them as good as possible, as creative as possible, a wide range of subjects. I try to reveal a lot about myself as a writer and a person in them. But don't just send out crappy newsletters. Don't just do it because people tell you to send out newsletters. You have to make them good. Otherwise, you're not going to generate any interest. Treat writing as a job. That's huge. Writing, don't wait for the muse in order to sit down and write. You got to write every day. You got to complete those books, even if they're not good. Some days writing feels like data entry. Writing is a job. Not all jobs are fun all the time. If you're writing for a living, you're very fortunate, but that doesn't mean it's going to be enjoyable every day, but you still have to treat it as a regular 9-to-5 job. And finally, don't buy shitty business cards. Don't get those tiny little super thin, toilet paper thin business cards and just like spew them all over conferences. Invest in really nice business cards and don't give them out that often. But when you do give them out, people will remember them. So those are my tidbits. So that's it for me. I hope that this was helpful. Enjoy Thriller Fest. I'm sorry that we're all not together. Hopefully next year, and happy writing.